Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you got a chance to watch part one of questions for real estate investors. So, as I mentioned before, the reason I did this is I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of presentations, and I always get these questions from people in the room, or maybe I'll get an email or something. So, I thought, you know what, I'm going to put together a couple presentations. There were so many questions, I broke it up into two presentations um, so that you could absorb all the info. And these are just kind of random questions that I get asked by real estate investors. Usually it's people who are wanting to know how to get into the business. And so these are all of the questions I've been asked and then my answers. So not that I have all the answers, I certainly don't. But this is how I kind of talk about my real estate investing experience and what I've learned over the many years I've been doing it. So hopefully this will help someone out there who watches it and is like, oh, okay, I didn't think of it that way. So without further ado, let's get going. So this is questions for real estate investors, part two. And if you missed part one, just go find it on the YouTube channel. All right. So one of the questions, I guess, this is actually kind of a two-parter. Do I need a real estate agent when buying a property, or should I get my real estate license? So I think they're kind of one and the same a bit. So you definitely do not need a real estate agent when you're buying properties, but this is what you do need. You do need to know what you're doing, right? Because you're entering into a contract, and I'm a real estate broker, and I'm not going to be practicing law here. So I'm just telling you that you need to be familiar with what types of contracts and the paperwork. Basically, you need to be familiar with the paperwork, right? Um, because sometimes deals fall through. You don't want to be on the hook for something. And so my advice to you is, if you are brand new, then do get a realtor who is, or a mentor or a coach who is versed and can teach you about the paperwork, because that's really important. You've done all this hard work. You've spent the money on the marketing. You've got a solid lead, 70% of ARV. The last thing you want to do is lose the deal because you didn't understand or didn't know what paperwork was involved when buying real property. And this has to do with whether you're doing, it doesn't matter what kind of strategy you are. This is for multifamily. This is for any type of real property that you're buying. You want to make sure that you're using the right paperwork, number one, and that when all said and done at the end of the day, that you took title to the property, right? That means that you own it, right? You might have a mortgage on it, but you own it. And then you need to be familiar with, like, there's all kinds of addendums, addendum for this, addendum for that. In my first video, I talked about the option agreement where I bought a property with $100 from a SEP IRA, my self-directed IRA, and I needed to use an option agreement. And in order to do that, I had to use an addendum. And there's another video about that out there too. So, but if you have to extend the contract, or to make sure, if you put up earnest money, you might have to extend the closing date. You might have to, put in a repair amendment. So you need to know what kind of addendums are used, amendments. And then you also need to find or have a title company that understands complicated deal structures. So I think I told you I do a lot of pre-probate. So these are they haven't been filed. A lot of times there's tracking down heirs and filing what's called the affidavit of heirship. And again, I'm not an attorney and I don't, practice. I just know that that's the form I need. So I need to be working with a title company who understands the process so that I can purchase a property. And that the title is written, especially if you're going to use your self-directed IRA. So, or you're going to do owner financing, so it's not just about, are you just going to go out and buy a rental property or an Airbnb property and you're going to get a traditional loan and you're going to close. That's different than some of these more creative strategies that I teach. And then you need the knowledge to structure the deal when using different exit strategies. So I always try to teach people about having at least two different exit strategies. So if you're talking to a seller and the house is this just happened, the house is completely distressed. The seller just owes way too much money. There's just no help. I can't buy the house for what the person wants. I would not be a good investor. And yeah, they're in a very distressed situation, and they kind of bit off more than they could chew, because then what they were doing is they bought the house, they were going to rehab it. And then, but then they realized it was just, they were way over their head with the amount of repairs. It was literally just, let's just start over on this one. So you don't have to be a realtor, and you don't have to have a realtor, but you do need to be familiar with the process and the paperwork and that kind of thing. Now, if you are going to use a realtor, not all realtors are created equal. And I can say this so nobody get offended, because real is like, I don't do traditional listings. So I couldn't advise you on, being a buyer's agent or a listing agent or anything like that. But I can tell you what to look for in a realtor when you're looking for your investment properties. So they can help you navigate the process, with the paperwork and things like that. They can help you verify the ARV with comps. You can have them pull comps for you on the sold properties. So, if you do have your realtor's license, and that's a benefit, right? You have access to the MLS and all of that, multiple listing service, that can be knowledgeable about investment properties. And what I would say is, ask them if they're investing, right? I have a lot of agents right now, calling me and wanting me to, they have clients that want to know, they want to buy an Airbnb. And so they're not versed in what that is. Now I'm helping them, become more versed for what to look for in a property, but they have clients that want to purchase Airbnbs, and they themselves have not done that. So that's something that they have to educate themselves on. And then realtors can be a great referral source for contractors, stagers, inspectors. They can just give you a list. They usually have a lot of contacts. So it's not a bad thing, and it's not a bad thing to get your real estate license. It just depends on what you're going to do with it. So for me, I had a property management company for many years. And so I have a broker's license, and so I don't do property management anymore, but I keep my broker's license. And so I still have all the access and everything. But remember, with that, I also have all the dues. So now, how can I learn about real estate investing? Okay, you need to take some action, right? You have to take action. It's not going to be something that, number one, you have to learn how to read markets, right? So right now we're in a very competitive and high priced market. So, if you're getting into it for the very first time, flipping might not be for you right now. I mean, you're gonna have to find a really good deal, right? And if you're not familiar with what that is, what that looks like, but you've got to take action and start educating yourself. Go to networking. I mean, watch podcasts or YouTube channels like this one. The first book I ever read was the Gary Keller, How to Be a Millionaire Real Estate Investor, I think it was. And that's still my Bible today on how to buy a rental property. It's a great book. You usually get it. He wrote it quite a while ago. It's a great resource if you don't know anything about buying rental properties, on long-term rentals. Networking is always a good way to just kind of absorb some information. And what I would say is just go and listen. A lot of networking events have different speakers talking about different topics. Conferences, I've been to my share of conferences, and I love conferences. Number one, it's a great networking, but also I like to go to conferences where there's way smarter people than me, and where I can learn from them, and then I can bring that back and implement it in my business. Speaking of conferences, there's the Winning Deals and Heels conferences coming up. So if that's something that you're interested in, hey, don't forget to email me about it. And then there's online courses. I've actually created a bunch of online courses that help people from how to start an Airbnb business to how to hire a property manager to how to talk to sellers. It's that you have to take the time and take the action to educate yourself if you want to really be successful in this industry. And then hire a mentor, hire me, hire someone else, but get someone in your corner that can literally, they've been where you want to go, right? We've been down that road. We are now on the other side, and we would love to help you get there. And I've hired mentors through my career because, again, I'm not the smartest person in the room for this particular area. So I want to learn that area. So I hire mentors and I learn that strategy. And that's how you continue to grow and scale your business. And then back to the first thing I said, you have to commit the time to learn. If you're not willing to put the time in to learn the real estate investing game, if you will, you're going to start and you're going to start and you're going to stop and you're going to feel frustrated and you're going to lose money. So this is a way for you to take action and really start educating yourself. Now, when I say take action, you can read books and listen to podcasts and all of that. But at some point, you've got to start. You've got to start your marketing. You've got to start talking to sellers. You've got to start building your list of private money lenders. So to be successful in this business, you need a whole team, if you will, of people that are going to support you in your business. Now, this is a good one, I guess, especially about Airbnb. Should I invest in out-of-state properties? So I will tell you that currently I am not investing in out-of-state properties. And when I invest, I have a certain philosophy about how I want to manage and run my business, right? Now, does that mean I won't be investing out of state? Not at all. And so there's some steps that I would take if I was going to do that. So number one, it has to do with your goals. So for example, I really want to, I love the Tennessee area and South Carolina and the Smoky Mountains and all that kind of area. And I also love Colorado. And I would love to have a vacation home, in Florida or something like that. So I'm in Texas. So, my goal is to have one of those types of properties, right? So again, I relate it to back what your goals are, right? So I would say, well, what do you know about the area that you want to invest in? I mean, if you are from, Nashville and you got family there, go for it. Because it kind of goes down back to the trusted boots on the ground. If you don't live there, who's going to be looking out for your project or your property? Are you going to hire a property manager? How will you oversee it? And then I always tell people to factor in, for their cost and whatnot, to factor in the cost of travel and management. Now, I know people that they buy properties and they just get a paycheck. That's what they want. They're not, they just hire somebody. But then what happens is they don't know what's going on with their property until something bad happens, and then they haven't been paying attention. So I am the kind of investor that I'm kind of more hands-on. I do have property management companies, but I want to know what's going on. So if you do want to look at properties outside your state, do you have vendor contacts in the area? I mean, that's huge. Like right now, that's huge. Trying to find, if you have to rehab a property, and let's just say, I don't know, South Carolina, and you don't know anybody there, you don't know anybody that, maybe you have a realtor that helped you purchase the property and maybe they referred a contractor, but you're not there and there's no one watching the contractor. Do you see the nightmare that could be unfolding? And then just ask yourself, why do you want to invest out of state? And as we said in the first video about Airbnb, maybe it's a vacation area that you really want to go to. So I always tie everything to what your goals are, right? So these are general questions that people ask when really it has to do with their time commitment, their money commitment, and what they are looking to get out of real estate investing. So now we're going to kind of shift topics. How will I determine the rent to charge for my property? So as a former property manager, I teach this course on, property management, how to be a better landlord, landlord essentials. So we're going to be covering quite a bit of that in the next 2 or 3 questions. So like anything with how to determine the rent to charge for my property, and this could be for long-term rentals and short-term rentals, you have to know the numbers. You have to know where to get them. And you have to know what they mean when you look at them. So number one, the rental market for similar properties. Now, I'm going to kind of talk about this in generalities because you could apply this to either short-term rentals or long-term rentals. So in the short-term rental market, again, I've done a video on YouTube about how to find what you can get on a nightly basis for your property. For a long-term rental, I use the MLS. I want to know what the vacancy rate is. I want to know how much rent I can charge. So a lot of new investors buy rental properties thinking that, let's say their mortgage payment is $2,000. Now I'm speaking of long-term rentals. Let's say that their mortgage payment is $2,000 and the rent in the neighborhood is only $1,850. So there's already a delta, right? So they didn't do their due diligence before they bought that property. So when I'm looking, part of my due diligence process, if I am looking at a rental property, whether it's for long-term or short-term, before I have inked the contract in terms of, closing, I know exactly how much money I can make off of that property, right? Whether long-term or short-term, because I've gone and I've done my due diligence. The other thing you want to look at is vacancy rate. So when the bank, if you're buying a long-term rental, what they'll do is they're just going to assign a 25% vacancy rate for their loan, how they calculate loans and things like that. Now, you may not ever have a 25% vacancy rate. I rarely do. I mean, that's, just we're talking pre-pandemic, not as pandemic, right? And but they'll look at a vacancy rate because they just want to factor that in for your loan, for your how much money they're going to lend to you, and if you can make the payments and things like that. Vacancy rate for short-term rentals is important because you want to know that you are purchasing a property. Not only can you charge, let's say, $500 a night, but that you can rent it, 12 months out of the year, not just 3. So vacancy rate becomes very important in both long-term and short-term rental. On the long-term rentals, you can, just like sold and, doing the ARV like we talked about, you can find out what the lease comps for similar properties in the area that you're looking at. So rents have gone up. So I have a kind of a situation where I have a property in a very high dollar, and we have property taxes here in Texas, and the property that, because of the appreciating area and the value of the house has gone up so high, the property taxes are killer, right? But the rents, although they have gone up, have not kept up with the value of the house. So I have a delta in one of my long-term rentals. So I had to make a decision. I had to find a new exit strategy because I was holding on to a property, even though I'd had it for a while. I was getting all the tax breaks and everything. It's appreciated so like more than double. That probably my exit strategy is going to be to sell the property and cash out, right? And then either 1031 the exchange, but because of the market, I am looking at maybe I should convert it into a long-term rental, but I think from the numbers I've done, the vacancy rate might be too high, meaning that I might only be able to rent it like half of the year. And I won't be able to really capitalize on that. So those are some things that I look at when I'm looking to sell or reinvest or whatnot. So, and then competition in the area is huge, both for rentals. So if you're buying in a neighborhood that's just has a lot of rentals, we're talking long-term now, then let's just say May comes up and everybody's renewing their lease and your rent is at, I don't know, 17, 18, 1900 a month, but everybody else is like, 1850, 1825. And in the rental market, people will, unless you have a whole lot of different amenities, tenants usually want to go with the same kind of quality for less, if that makes sense. And then the last thing that you'll want to look at is your carrying costs. And the competition in the area, just before we move on, you also, as I talked about how to find the competition for Airbnb. So you can go on to Airbnb as a guest and you can look at the area that you're wanting to invest in and you can find out, what Airbnbs are out there. I have another video that's all about that on YouTube. But you can find your competition. And so then you can know, oh man, this area is like too saturated, or maybe, there's a not, or I can be pricey. So one Airbnb that I have is actually in with a bunch of other Airbnbs, but I'm on the water. One of them is like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We're a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So I wasn't too nervous, if you will, about would I be able to rent that property. And I'm actually renting it higher than my neighbors. So Now, how do I find the right tenant for my rental property? So we're kind of sticking in that theme with the landlord. And I will talk a little bit about screening for Airbnb. But the thing is, on Airbnb, they're not tenants, right? They're guests. And so it's a completely different process that you do. So let's just focus on tenant screening for right now. So tenant screening is how you determine, let's go back. So the question was, how do I find the right tenant for my rental property? So what you're going to do is you're going to set up a process, and that's called tenant screening, right? So first you're going to advertise and market the property. You're going to have an application process where you receive applications. And in one of my trainings, I talk about, how to actually find the best tenant for your property. You're going to use what I call a tenant selection criteria form. This is a form that tells potential renters, hey, I'm going to be checking your background. I'm going to check your criminal. I'm going to check, if you have dogs, I'm going to check your income. It just tells them ahead of time, hey, I'm going to check all these things, and you have them sign it. You document their income and rental history. So you're basically going to do a very thorough background check for your property. Now, let me just put a little caveat in here. Whatever your process is, it needs to be the same across the board for all your long-term rentals. Now, we're not talking short-term. We're only talking long-term rentals. So whatever your process is of receiving applications and documenting income, you need to treat applicant A, B, C, and so on the same across the board. So again, you'll want to learn this process, right? So that's how you determine how to get the right tenant for your property. You're going to use a solid lease agreement that spells out, who's responsible, when rent's going to be paid, what happens if you don't pay rent, and then collecting the security deposit and first month's rent with certified funds, never personal check, never cash, never Venmo, never credit card. Certified meaning you can have the money wired to your bank account or just get a cashier's check, right? So there is a process for making sure you have the right tenant, and it has to do with your tenant screening process. So this is something that you as the landlord need to learn, because you can't just go, well, how am I going to get a right tenant? Well, it's on you to make sure you get the right tenant. Now, who pays the utilities? Now, this is one of those questions that it kind of depends, So most single family homes where you're just, there's a landlord, there's a tenant, the tenant is the one that's going to be paying them, right? It's usually when you get into multifamily, maybe the water is, maybe each unit has, so I had a condo, and the rent included the water, but then the tenant paid for the electricity. So the landlord, I had HOA dues, and so I had to pay for the water and trash, which we just rolled into the rent, but it was in my name, and then the tenant got the utilities. And multifamily could be both, maybe the owner pays for the water, and the tenant has to pay for electric and gas. If you're doing Airbnb, it's always the property owner. I mean, I don't think guests would stay at your house if you had them paying for utilities. And of course, if it's a flip, it's going to be the property owner. So really, it's on the investment property, and you're only going to have a few times where the tenant is paying, and that's usually in the multifamily space. And then, of course, you're always going to identify in the lease agreement who pays for what, right? So if the tenant is responsible for only the electricity, then that needs to be written into your lease agreement. If the tenant is responsible for all utilities, like in all of our houses where we have a long-term tenant, they're responsible for all the utilities, and that's written in the lease. Tenant is responsible for all utilities, and then we list out, it's gas, it's, electric, water, trash, whatever. And then the landlord is responsible for the HOA dues, not the tenant. And this is why, if you ask a tenant to pay the HOA dues, you're probably going to get a letter from the HOA saying that your HOA dues were not paid. So just make sure you take care of those. Now, what if the tenant causes damage to my property? Okay, landlords, this is again on you. There are some things that you can do to be proactive with all of your tenants and all of your rentals. And this goes across the board between Airbnb and long-term rentals, but this is mostly for long-term rentals. So the documentation is key. So you, Mr. Landlord, Mrs. Landlord, Ms. Landlord, you have to make sure that you've documented through the move in and move out inventory condition form before the tenant moves into the property. You've got pictures, you've got videos, you have what the property looks like, and you have it dated prior to them moving in. Then what you do through your process after you've done the tenant screening, then what you're going to do is you're going to ask the tenant to give you an inventory condition form within 5 days of them moving in. So now you've got a record of what the property looked like when the tenant took the keys, what the tenant says they, which should be very similar to what your condition form is. And then you're going to keep track of the property. You're not just going to, never see your property again. So have biannual inspections, at the very least, have them every 12 months at renewal. Like just, before you renew a lease or whatever, just go in. Lots of things can be cured if you are on top of it, the 6 months to 12 months, right? But if you're a landlord that does not, or your property manager never checks on a property, and now the tenant's been there 3 or 4 years, yeah, there's going to be some damage. So it's really up to the landlord to be proactive. Vendors can be a great source for keeping tabs on property. So here's a little tip for you, and one of my secrets. So when a tenant, calls in or emails in about a repair request, then we set up the repair request. And because of the relationship I have with all the vendors, because I was the property manager paying them, I would just ask them to take pictures of the area that they were in, not the whole house. So if they were, for example, if the dishwasher needed to be replaced, then they would take pictures of all of that. And also it's documentation. So I had a situation where the water heater went out and the tenant needed a new water heater. We sent the vendor out, and the vendor could not put in the new water heater. It was in the garage because there were so many boxes, they couldn't even get to it. Right. So the tenant had to clean that up before we could even get to the water heater. So it's good to have relationships with your vendors and your contractors so they can take, snap some pictures of the outside, or, like if they see a broken garage door, which is another story we had. And then you can address it before it gets way out of hand. Charge larger security deposits. And so there's no rule that says that whatever the rent is per month, that should be the security deposit. You can charge in Texas up to 2.5 times the amount of rent for a security deposit. And I generally do. I have found that tenants, now it's completely refundable, right? Completely refundable if the tenant takes care of it. But what I have found is that tenants have a tendency to take better care of the property when they have a larger security deposit in play. It means that they have some skin in the game. So for example, if I'm charging $1,300 a month in rent and I charge a $1,300 security deposit and they ruin the carpet, well, chances are I'm going to have to pay more than $1,300 in replacing the carpet. So, there's some things a landlord can do to kind of protect themselves. And then always make sure you itemize all of the charges, right, for the tenant. Don't just lump it up and say, okay, it's $1,300. Let them know, okay, it's, this much for taking the carpet out. It's this much for, new carpets tax. Make it as detailed as possible. Now, again, documentation is key, but the lease agreement states who's responsible for any damage to the property. And on rare occasions, and this happened to us on one of our properties, it wasn't a rental. I was actually going to own or finance it. And the person living in the house actually vandalized it, meaning that it was one of those situations. She sold the front door. She stole the water heater. She pulled all the copper out of anything that was copper, the wires, everything. And that was considered vandalism. And we were able to file an insurance claim for the vandalism of the house. Work out a payment plan with the tenant. If it's, something very, if it's something that they want to keep their record clean, that they don't owe anything, you can work out a payment plan with the tenant. You can also file in small claims court for a judgment. This is sometimes, depending on the amount that you're going after, takes some time. And, if they don't have any money, you can get a judgment against them. And that's kind of a warning for other landlords, because what we do is if we see that when we pull their credit, we say, hey, we'd like to rent to you, but you need to pay, ABC landlord back before we can do that. So that's kind of good for other landlords if you take that extra step. And then once you do get a garnishment, or I'm sorry, a judgment, then you can actually go and garnish their wages. Now, there's a whole bunch of steps in between there, but these are some things that you can do. But like I said in the beginning, documentation is key. The landlord needs to be proactive. We're going to talk about like if they refuse to pay rent now, but I just want to say documentation is key. Using the move in, move out condition form, have biannual inspections, and your vendors can be a great source for keeping tabs on that property. So now, what if the tenant refuses to pay rent? Okay, landlords, hang on, because also I'm going to, take task with you all taking care of this. So there's some things that landlords need to just take responsibility for, and getting bad tenants in their properties is one of them. So if you don't have a good tenant screening process, reach out to me, because you need to learn how to screen your tenants, right? In all the years I did property management, and I managed over 1,000 doors, I can probably count on maybe two hands the number of times I went to eviction court. Most of the time, if you do these things up front, you don't have problems with people. Not that tenants don't leave and that kind of thing, but very rarely did we have to evict anybody for non-payment of rent. We did get them out there, and there's some things that you as a landlord, you've got to be proactive. You can't just sit back and say, okay, remember, this is a business. Even if you just have one property, if you have 10 properties, if you have 50 properties, it's a business, right? You own a property that you're renting out, and you need to collect the rent. So number one, you need to have a solid lease agreement about rent payments. You need to specify and spell it out. Rent is due on the 1st, payable here. So like in our lease agreements, we only take electronic payments now. We don't take checks, we don't take cash. The tenant has to pay electronically. And we don't take credit cards. So you're the landlord. You can set up how you want your payments, and you can put that in your lease agreement. And if the tenant doesn't agree to it, you don't have to rent to them. So these are your terms, right? This is how you ensure you get your rent. So number one, have a solid lease agreement about rent payments. Conduct a tenant orientation at the beginning of a lease. This will cut down on so many of your problems with tenants. So once you've done your due diligence, you've gotten a good applicant that now you're training the tenant, things happen. It's life, right? And so sometimes things will happen. The kids will break something, that, the tenant will lose their job. But if you haven't established that relationship and expectations at the very beginning of the lease, it's really hard to do, midway or 2 years into the lease. So I conduct a tenant orientation. And what this means is I review the lease agreement. I have what's called addendum A, where we go through the, most important parts. I break it down into like basic, here's what you need to do. Here's what the landlord will do. And this is done at the time that the keys are issued. So it's a packet they get. We talk about the move-in condition form, any nuances about the property, and then everybody signs off on it. And a little tip, if you're having tenants sign documents, make sure they initial and date each page, because then that shows that you did review them. Follow your process without fail. So I hear so many times that people will now this is not pandemic stuff. There was nothing that landlords could do when the government stepped in and said, tenants don't have to pay rent. This is, when we're back to or in normal times, and you can be a landlord and, kick people out if they don't pay you rent. So follow your process without fail, so you need to have a system in place, and you can automate a lot of this. So if your lease says that the rent is due on the 1st, then, by the 3rd, because you have to give them like a day to pay. So on the 3rd, we have a email that goes out that says, hey, you didn't pay your rent, you've incurred the $50 late fee, and it's $10 late. You have X number of days to pay the rent, or then we're going to file eviction. And you have to follow through with that. You do have to follow through with it. You can't train your tenants. Now, I will say, I'll just share this with you. In the very beginning, I didn't do that when I first started out many moons ago. And so, yeah, I had a couple tenants that, they never paid rent on time. And it was just, I didn't train them right. So think of it that way, landlords. You've got to train your tenants right. Do not let them become excessively late to stay in your property. Don't split the rent up. Don't take partial payments. The longer you let the problem reside, I know you want to be a nice person. They're going through a hard time, but you've got to run it like a business. And then in Texas, anyway, don't know about everybody else, but if there's a repair that needs to be fixed and the tenant has not paid rent, the landlord is not required to. Now, if it affects the safety and health of the tenant, obviously you're going to, but you don't have to, right? So just kind of know that too, that the tenant does have to be current in their rent. Well, should I make any improvements to my investment property before renting out? So this is a big one. You're so excited. This is usually from brand new landlords, or they just, maybe have a couple of properties and they want to know, well, should I, how should I, because they think if they make a whole bunch of improvements to the property, they're going to get more rent, which is not true. So if you go in and over improve a rental property, you're not going to get your money back. That's not a good return on investment. It's a rental property, right? So that's what you need to make sure of. Now, if it's an Airbnb, that's a different story. So we're talking about long-term rentals here. So first ask yourself this before you start going in there with the jackhammer and, getting all the contractors and redoing everything. What improvements are needed? So anything that affects the health and safety of a tenant, you have to fix that. That's more of a repair, not so much as improvement, but like locks on the doors and the little peepholes in the doors. And so look around. Do you need to do that? You might have to, upgrade the electrical panel. So look at the things that, first off, does it affect the health and safety of a tenant? Is code compliance involved? So, you might want to go into your rental and, put in some nice fixtures. And this is usually what they want to upgrade the cabinets and the kitchen, go from, maybe it was the Corian counter. Now they want to go to granite, or laminate. Laminate is what I'm talking about here. And, you don't have to do that for a rental. So flooring needs replacement. We look at doing carpet versus tile. Will it be bringing in higher rent? So you got to know your numbers, as I said before, but typically if you spend, $10,000, $15,000 on a kitchen redo for a rental property, you're not going to realize the return on investment with that kind of a improvement. Now, if you're going to sell the house, you probably want to do that. So this is my advice. Don't over improve a long-term rental, but do over improve a short-term rental, because you're getting higher, it's a different clientele that you're going after, right? So there's a difference. So as I said, don't over improve a long-term rental, because the next question is, how long does it take to get a return? So if you keep dumping money into a rental that you're never going to get that money back, because you've upgraded everything, then, it's going to take longer to get a return on your investment. So there's so many factors that go into this though. So how you bought the property. I mean, if you didn't buy it right, it's might take a long time to get your money back or a good return. And so what you really need to look at is, real estate investing, when you're buying long-term rentals and Airbnbs and owner financing, it's a kind of a long-term game, right? Yes, you can make money and people do. But if you're having a rental portfolio, what you're building is long-term wealth, right? That's passive income. That's what you're looking for. So how you bought the investment property, like there might be, first off, what was your exit strategy? So if you flipped it, if you bought it, like I've bought some properties that, I thought was going to be owner finance, and then I had to sell them retail, just because of the way the market was and whatnot. And so the return on investment was a little bit smaller. I mean, I still made money. But I've actually had deals where I didn't make money. It's a sad day when you go to closing and you have to bring money, and it happens to the best of us. So, what was the exit strategy? And then I always try to buy in appreciating areas, because that's how you get return on investment. So it's kind of it's not necessarily cash in your pocket, but you can, remember we talked about leveraging, you can leverage that appreciating house. So when the house, appreciates in value, then, and you've owned it for a while, you can do a cash out refi and pull some of that equity out. So it's all about the type of investment, how you bought it, short-term rental versus long-term. I will tell you, like on a short-term rental, when I bought a short-term rental, I bought it and then I had to furnish it. So I probably won't recoup that money for at least 12 months, right? Because of all the money that I put into it. So it wasn't, it's cash flowing, but I still put a lot of cash into it to get it up and going so that I could, right? So you'll have some startup costs, if you will. And then there's carrying costs. So, and rehab and improvements. So but what you have to think about is the more you put into a property, is that going to increase the value or decrease, right? So if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, you can pretty much do anything to a property in it or not, and it increases. So there's just so many things that go into that answer. So I'm going to give you a couple of case studies, or at least one. So I bought a property I'm very famous for, where I used $5,000 from my self-directed IRA. So that property, when I first purchased it, was the tax value was around $12,000, right? And I bought it, I had a partner and we paid 10. So today, and that was about 4 years ago. So today that property now is worth over $100,000. Now, these are like smaller numbers. So the return on investment, I mean, because we owner financed it, I got all my money back like within 2 months of even getting that. So the return on investment was immediate and then some. Maybe a flip I did at the beginning of the pandemic, I wanted to owner finance, and it wasn't really, we were having people were starting to lose their job or whatever. So we ended up selling at retail. If I'd held it a little bit longer, I probably would have made more money, right? So it's just so many factors go into that question. And then, like I said, do you have equity in property from day one? Because that's a return on investment. What will your tax savings be? Now, I'm not a tax person, but you need a good tax strategist to help you with this. How much cash did you put into the property? How fast can you rent it? Time versus money. That's what it's all about. And then I've already talked a little bit about the appreciating area. Now, the next question, how can I maximize my investment property profits? So great question. I love this one because everybody wants to think that, oh my gosh, when you're in real estate investing, you're always having profits, right? So again, it's all about your goals. So if you just want to take that money and sock it away, go on a trip or whatever. So it's, what do you want to do with the profits, right? So number one, hire a great CPA, because that will just help you keep more of those profits, especially as your property, you're buying it down and all of that. You can pay down the mortgage with the extra profits if that's what you want to do. You can use the profits to purchase another property, right? You can have a rating day account for repairs, property taxes, or you could become a private money lender. So if you have a property that's cash flowing very nicely, you can take that money and reinvest it, reinvest in another property. Pay down your mortgage. We don't escrow our property taxes, so I pay them at the end of the year. So I have to make sure that I have all that money, in a special account. So it's not really here, but I do talk about getting an LLC set up. So for your properties, it's up to you. That's why you want to hire a good CPA if you want to do like multiple LLCs for each entity, or I have just a couple LLCs and I do different things with those LLCs. So, but I'm advised by my CPA. So it's great to have cash flow, and, so it's really what do you want to do with it? What are your financial goals? And if you're wanting to continue your investing, maybe you put that profit into marketing, right? Because marketing is kind of a game where, it's a numbers game. And the more you market, the more calls you're going to get, the more calls you get, the more deals you get. So, there's a whole lot of things you can do to scale your business with that money that you're getting. How much will I need for closing costs? So this is a great question. And, there's really no rule of thumb here, but this is what I'm going to tell you. So typically it's like 1% to 2% of the purchase price. Again, it's about the financing, the title company that you're using and all of that. Now, what I like to do is negotiate when I'm purchasing the property. So a lot of times, you don't have to get a new survey. Sometimes you do, because the seller has a survey. You can use private money lenders and negotiate the points and paid on loans. Most title companies charge about the same thing across the board. So you can't really get out of that unless I've had a situation where I had a property that was very hot and I sold it and I didn't pay anything. I made the buyer pay all of my closing costs, because there's closing costs when you sell a property and closing costs when you buy a property. So there's no rule that says, okay, well, the seller has to pay these and that. Okay, when you get into like FHA and those types of loans, yes. But as an investor, there's no rule that says I have to pay all these closing costs or the buyer has to. So you can negotiate. Everything is negotiable in real estate. That's why I love it so much. So in the answer to this question, I would say, well, it's probably about 2%. That's what the closing costs are. I mean, do you have a realtor? I mean, there could be so many things in there. Are you paying commission? So typically when I buy properties, I'm not paying any commission. So I try to get it as low as possible. And depending on the situation, for my owner finance properties, almost always the buyers are paying all of my closing costs. So there's a lot of things that you could do, but if you're just looking for a number, I would say use 1 to 2%. Okay, now we're going to flip into property management, and this is kind of my area of expertise. And should you hire one? Well, here's what I have to say about that. You need to ask yourself these things, right? Number one, do you have the time? So if you don't have the time to look at your own investment properties or that one investment, then yes, maybe you need a property manager. But what type of an investment is it, right? So long-term, short-term. If you have, I would say less than 10 properties, it's pretty easy to manage your properties yourself, even short-term rental. But there's a couple of things that go behind that statement. Number one, you have to be organized, right? If you're not organized, then property management is not for you. Number two, you have to have systems in place, for automatic rent collection, automatic payments out, or automatic emails to tenants, that kind of thing. And then you have to have a team of like contractors and things like that. How does having a property manager affect your bottom line? Well, typically a long-term property manager will charge you somewhere between 8 and 10% to manage your property. For long-term rentals and you get a good property manager, it's well worth it, right? Even though I have done property management, I don't do it anymore. And I do have a property manager. Short-term rentals, it's all over the board. I've seen all kinds of different prices that people pay. And you have to say, what am I getting for that price? Because that seems to be the big factor. So for example, I had a company that was just, they did it for 10% flat rate, but they were volume. And so the struggle I had with them was that they weren't getting the nightly rate that I needed for them to get. Because they did it low, right? They did it too low for my property. So I fired them. I've seen, there's co-hosting where they'll charge anywhere from 25 to 30 to, don't pay 50%, but it's up there, right? So you have to say, well, what are they doing for the fee? And how involved do you not want to be, right? So I always tell people, especially in the short-term rental space, at least learn what it is that they're going to be doing for you. There's a lot of apps that you can get to kind of set up your short-term rental calendars, automate the process. And I have found it's actually a little bit easier than regular property management. And then if you are going to hire a property management company, then ask them, because a lot of people will pop up and say, oh, I'm a property manager, but they've never actually managed any properties. So you need to find out what their criteria, how long they've been doing it, what type of investments are they managing, because there's a difference between a short-term rental and a long-term rental, between a multifamily and a single-family home. So you need to find out and then how many's on their staff. I mean, how many properties are they managing and what's their staff ratio? And then are you able to put eyes on the property? I mean, you might have somebody else managing it, but if you can put eyes on the property, maybe you want to keep it. So there's some things you just need to ask yourself. Just saying, I don't have time. You need to look into what is the company going to be doing for you and what's it going to cost and how does it affect your bottom line? And then do you have contacts for vendors, repair, cleaning, maintenance, in the short-term rental space? I've gone on and on about this, but having a great cleaning crew, not just great, outstanding cleaning company can get you more bookings, higher nightly rates, better reviews. So if you don't have those contacts, then yes, you might want to reach out to a property management company. But again, make sure you're asking the due diligent questions for property management. And then and this kind of goes into the due diligence. Do you know what to look for in a property management company? I mean, just because your buddy does property management does not mean that they make a good property management person as far as managing your investment, right? Um, and then do you know the questions to ask before you hire the property management company? So one of the questions that I ask, and if they can't even answer it, I just move on. But what is your eviction ratio? This is on long-term rentals. What reports do they provide? How do they handle tenant disputes? When will you get paid? This is a biggie. I actually interviewed a property management company, and remember, they're collecting the rent on the first, and it's pretty standard for them to pay you around the 10th or 11th because they're wanting to make sure that the tenant's check or however they paid clears their bank and whatnot before they pay you. But I actually interviewed a property management company and they were paying owners quarterly. Yeah, that does not work for me. So, and it should not work for you either. There's no reason for a property management company to keep your money for that long of a period of time. I can guarantee you that, that those property management companies are getting interest off of your funds. They're using the funds to, and just don't. And then if a problem happens, then you're kind of SOL if they go out of business. So just make sure you're getting paid. And then how's the security deposit handled? So a lot of owners don't realize that you cannot, even if you got the person into your properties, you cannot keep the security deposit. You have to turn that over to the property management company. So just FYI. Do I need a home inspection? Okay, so this is my personal preference. Okay, and I say yes, especially if you're brand new. Once you've been doing it for a while, you might, and I've bought houses without doing an inspection, but I find that, spending that $300 or $400 is just another set of eyes on the property, and it can become a great negotiating tool. So if you go in, it's pretty easy to spot foundation problems here in Texas. But I'm not a plumber. And so it's good to have a plumber come out and kind of run, the flow and whatever they do. But then you can always go back to the seller and say, hey, you know what? I offered this, but now I found out I'm going to have to replace this electrical panel. And that's another, $2,500. So you can use it as a negotiating tool, but especially if you're brand new, cough up that $300 or $400 to have an inspection. Number one, you'll kind of learn, oh, okay, I need to look at that. So like on electrical panels, if they were made in a certain year, the name is escaping me. I know you all can put it in the comments there, but they need to be replaced. They're a fire hazard, Pacific standard, right, guys? So those have to be replaced. So they can also point out things that you might have missed. They document the condition of the property when you purchase, which is really handy if you're going to flip and sell the house. So let's say you flip a house, you sell it, and then, the person who bought the house, 6 months down the road says, well, wait, this house is sinking or whatever the thing is. You can show your due diligence, but if you don't have that third party inspection, you could be facing some issues there. And then it helps to determine the repair cost, and it impacts your exit strategy. So I've done inspections on houses and then go, oh, there's no way we can flip this house, right? It's going to cost too much. So we have to come up with another exit strategy. Let's make it a buy and hold, right? So it helps you determine how much money you're going to have to spend to repair that house. So what do I need to do before getting into real estate investing? Well, this is really easy for me. You need to call me. You need to get in touch with me. So if you watch both videos, there's a whole lot of components of real estate investing. So why don't you talk with someone who's been there, done it, and can kind of help you get together an action plan, look at what your goals are, so give me a shout out, and if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and share, please. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. Have a great one and happy investing.